Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have a card set that features some exclusive stamps and dies from Simon Says Stamp. The cat and dog are from a Pawesome stamp set designed by Christina Warner, and I colored them a few weeks ago as part of Kathy Rakusin's 30-day color challenge over on Instagram, although I think you could participate on blogs as well. And I recently turned them into cards, but I'm going to show you the coloring process first. And so you see I'm coloring both the cat and the dog, and I make a card very similar for each one, just slightly different color schemes. I do similar coloring on both the cat and the dog. I'm using my W markers, W1, 3, 5, and 7. I want the animals to appear a dark gray, almost blackish color. And so I am going to be extending mostly from W3 to W7. Because the cat's head and the dog's head are actually a little bit large for the average critter stamp, I'm going to be doing a full coloring where I start with the lightest color and then add on the darker colors. When there's only a small amount of space, I'm more likely to start with my darker color and blend out, because I can sometimes saturate the paper a little bit too much when I start with a lighter color. But in this instance, there's actually quite a bit of space to fill, particularly on the heads. When I did the layering of all the inks on the smaller areas of the stamp, I did get a little bit of bleeding out. The paper that I normally color on is Georgia Pacific 110-pound cardstock, and you definitely get less bleeding with a thicker cardstock than that, but it's what I've gotten used to coloring on, and I actually do better on it than on heavier cardstock because it's just what I'm used to. In terms of the shadowing, I'm going to do what I typically do and add the darker areas where things meet, where like natural shadows would be, between the legs there would be a natural shadow because less light would be reaching them as the front legs are in back of the, as the back legs are, in the back kind of thing. I don't know if that makes sense, but like when light comes, it hits the things that are closest to you with the most light. But also with the heads, I want them to appear rounded, and I achieve that effect by adding the darkest shadows on the left and right side of the faces and then blending it out. This is all my very standard coloring and what I typically do when I color critters. Now that I have both the cat and the dog colored, I decided to die cut them out, but I also want to use the Pawesome word die that comes with the cat and dog. So there is the Pawesome stamp set, but the coordinating dies cut out a separate word. And I think that's a really interesting thing that Simon Says Stamp does. It doesn't cut out a stamp from the set, but it still perfectly coordinates with the stamp set. And I will be using the You Are Pawesome sentiment from the stamp set. I decided to cut the sentiment out in black. I want to keep the animals the darker grayish black and the sentiment black, but I'm going to add a lot of color with my watercolor background. And I've decided to make the cards kind of side by side, use a lot of similar techniques, but I'm going to use a warm color scheme on the dog and a cool color scheme on the cat. I decided to make the dies a little bit sturdier by cutting them out of several pieces of black cardstock and layering that together because it is a very fine, thin die. To create the watercolor background, I'm starting with 140-pound cold press watercolor paper from Canson. I spray the watercolor paper with ink so that way it's nice and wet and the ink will spread around, and I'm basically looking to achieve just a really artsy watercolor background effect, and I'm just kind of taking chances with it. I'm not worried about it getting any particular way. I'm not looking for a very certain look. I'm just looking for the colors to blend and play together and just create something really fun. So what I'm doing is, like I said, I sprayed the whole background to start so the colors would flow. Then I layered on red, orange, and yellow. So between the two cards I'll create the full rainbow. One will be the red, orange, yellow warm colors, and the next one will be green, blue, purple cool colors. And I decide that I want to make the darkest bit of the color in a stripe from the bottom left to the top right, because that will coordinate with where I place the dog and the sentiment, as they will go in the less highlighted areas and you'll really see all that color. I am taking a large brush that's very wet and just kind of pooling color down and letting it move around the paper as it will. I'm spraying water on top of it with a mister. I don't want any area to be really, really heavy, but I do want some areas to be darker. And I'm getting different effects by just playing around. I'm squeezing the brush out to create concentrated bits of ink, as well as just spreading it around. And then once I really get a solid layer of color on the bottom, I'm going to start flicking in some techniques. I am always spraying over the watercolor once I lay it down because it's the easiest way for it to blend, and it creates the most natural blend. The water from the spray bottle, the way it comes out really just pushes the color around and creates that natural blend, and it makes sure that there's no harsh lines, because when you add the color with the brush, it's very clear where you stopped brushing on, but when you spray the water just kind of flows in a natural way. And so now that I have a good base layer and I have the colors blended a little bit in between, I'm going to start flicking on some colored paint in each color. So I'm flicking a little bit of red mostly over the area that I colored red, but making sure that some of the flicks, some of the droplets get into the orange area. And then when I do the orange, I want to make sure there's some flicks of orange in the red area and in the yellow area. So I continue to create that blended, essentially kind of ombre effect. I mean, ombre is typically, I guess that's not the best word for it, because ombre is usually variations of one color, and that's not really what I have here. Once I have the flicks of color on there, I am going to squirt a little bit of water into my hand and then kind of flick it out and squeeze my hand so the droplets fall on there and create some resist, and that will just again add texture and interest. And I just want to, like I said before, want to layer everything on till I really create an effect that I like, that looks super artsy. And then for the panel for the cat, I just did the same thing with a different color palette. I wish I could tell you a little bit more, like, oh, specifically do this if you want to replicate this effect, but it's really just about being artsy and playing, and I wanted to show you what can happen when you're free to experiment. And what's great about watercolor is it does continuously react with water, so you can always pull back on the color or add more color. I'm stamping in the sentiment, and I just want the UR. The whole stamp says "You are Pawesome," but I just took some sticky notes and covered where it says Pawesome, and I'm going to place the die there as well. The watercolors that I used is a Koi Watercolor sketch box, which is really inexpensive compared to some watercolor sets. And I'll leave a link to that and some of the other products in the description below in case you're interested in picking those up for yourself to play around with. I am stamping the sentiment in VersaFine ink, Onyx VersaFine ink, because it's a waterproof ink, and even though I don't intend on adding any more water, I just thought that it also gives a really crisp impression, and it would work well in this instance, but you could really use any black ink. To glue down the delicate die cut that says Pawesome, I am going to use Multimedia Matte from Ranger. Usually I have it in a bottle, but I also have a large jar of it, and I thought that this time it would actually be easier if I simply dabbed on a little bit of the multimedia right from the container. So I just put it on my finger, no sophisticated tools necessary, and some of the glue is obviously getting on my craft sheet underneath, which is fine. It's the Ranger craft sheet, so it cleans up really easily. And also, when it gets on the craft sheet, it's also getting on the die cut a little bit, but because it dries matte, you're not going to notice that there's actually dried glue on top of those sentiments. And so then I'm just ready to adhere the dog and cat on, and I'm going to adhere them in the opposite corner as the sentiment to create a sense of balance. And I decided to pop them up on some foam tape because right now this is a relatively flat card, and while I do like to keep them easy to mail, the really thin Scotch 3M foam tape is still mailable. It won't create any effects. I've never had a card that used the Scotch 3M that had any problems in terms of getting through the mail. I have had other cards eaten by the mail machines, but not with the foam tape. The stitched rectangle the stitched rectangle panel that I'm using today is actually the slightly smaller one. Usually I use the largest of the small stitched rectangle panels, but based on the scale of the critters, I decided to go one smaller than I usually do, and it's from the large stitched rectangle set from Lawn Fawn this time. Then I pulled in just one of the colors from my background, layered it onto that color cardstock, and then onto black cardstock. The black again just makes that sentiment pop and the critters pop a little bit. And that's going to be it for my card set today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafty videos, you can subscribe to my channel. I'm going to leave links to the products in the video description below and a link to my blog so you can check out more about these cards. And I'm going to be entering this into the Simon Says Stamp Create Your Own Background Wednesday challenge. Thanks for watching.